Module 2, the law, what we need to know. The first thing we need to know is the Health and Safety at Work Act in 1974, because it's the primary health and safety legislation that governs us in the UK, and it sets out responsibilities of employers and employees as well as others. The Act itself, it also gives powers to the HSE, to the Health and Safety Executive, so they can write and enforce health and safety regulations. So if we are enforcing regulations, then we're feeling that there's going to be prosecutions if need be. When we take an overview of the legislative framework that surrounds working with ladders, the Health and Safety at Work Act sits at the top, and then the regulations, as we've just identified, fall underneath the Act. Underneath the regulations, we have the Approved Codes of Practice, or ACOPs, as they're commonly known. So these aren't law, they're sort of semi-quasi-legal law, what people say about them, but they're not law themselves. But you must, if you choose not to follow an approved code of practice that's been written by the HSE, then you must be able to demonstrate that you followed the law, the Act, or the regulations in some other way, which would be difficult to prove if you have an accident and you didn't follow the approved code of practice. We also have health and safety guidance, which is released by the HSE, which we'll be looking at in a few slides. And we also have industry guidance. When we're thinking about ladders, we can think of the Ladder Association, which is the most prominent industry guidance in the UK for the use of ladders. It's very important that we understand that the Health and Safety at Work Act and the regulations are criminal law, because this means if we breach the law, we can, as we said, be prosecuted. So the organisations can be prosecuted, but also individuals can be prosecuted. And when we focus on the regulations that surround the use of ladders, the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999, the management regs as they're known, Regulation 3 requires a risk assessment to be written for working at height if you're using ladders and there is a significant risk of a fall. The Provision and Use of Work Equipment Regulations 1998, the PUR regs, these require maintenance and inspection of work equipment. Ladders and their accessories are certainly work equipment. And the activity of actually working from a ladder, you are working at height. So the Work at Height Regulations 2005. If we look onto the HSE website, we can see we have the law, a really good website, and it gives us all the information we need to know about working at height. And just to identify your employees have general legal duties to take reasonable care of themselves and others who may be affected by their actions, and also to cooperate with our employers, because we must enable them to undertake their duties under the Act. We can see some relevant guidance here for working at height, for safe use of ladders, and also the step-by-step guide, which we'll look at more in a moment. We can also use Google to have a look at the Work at Height regulations proper. So this is on legislation.gov.uk. We can look through the table of contents, through working at height, organising, competence, avoiding risks, selection of work equipment, requirements for particular work equipment. So there are a number of regulations there, but it's important to know about Schedule 6, because Schedule 6 itself is specific for ladders. So if we're working for ladders, or if we're writing risk assessments for ladders, or if we're supervising employees who work from ladders, we should be familiar with Schedule 6, the requirements for ladders. And here we have 10 areas where we can investigate, look through that, so you further improve your knowledge, not just of ladders like we're covering now, but also what it actually states in the law. So people talk about the sort of the hierarchy of control for working at height. When they talk about that, they talk about avoiding working at height, preventing a fall from occurring if you can't avoid working from height. And then when you're thinking about prevent, if no, you go to minimize, so minimizing the fall. After that, we have the use of ladders. So this is a very useful guide on the HSE website. Interestingly with this, if we look back into the regulations, it's avoid, prevent and minimize. If we go to Regulation 6, that avoid, prevent and minimise actually sits within Regulation 6 as well. Regulation 6.1, well, we have avoidance. So first of all, the first thing we're going to do is avoid. 6.1 actually tells us that we must do that risk assessment that we mentioned under Regulation 3. If we can't avoid, then it says every employer shall take suitable and sufficient measures to prevent. So prevent, so far as is reasonably practicable, any person falling a distance liable to cause personal injury. So we've had avoid, we've had prevent, and then if we look to Regulation 5, it mentions here where the measures taken under paragraph 4 do not eliminate the risk of a fall occurring, every employer shall, so far as is reasonably practicable, provide sufficient work equipment to minimise. This is where minimise comes in. Minimise the distance and consequences of the fall. So I just wanted to show you where this guidance sits on the internet. Prosecutions. We've just mentioned it. Employers can be prosecuted, employees can be prosecuted, but also non-employees. So why we say non-employees, it's not that they can be prosecuted, but employers have a legal duty of care to non-employees. So if somebody comes into your workplace to conduct maintenance when they work at height, when they're working from a ladder, then we still have a legal duty under Section 3 of the Act. When we look at this prosecution, £1.1 million fine after a worker's severe blood loss in a ladder fall. So this gentleman was an engineer, and a ladder slipped away from him and he fell almost 3 meters. So for that ladder to slip, then ultimately the ladder could not have been secured. He suffered severe blood loss and he required a blood transfusion and also 14 stitches to his head, but also he sustained a fractured vertebrae and suffered soft tissue damage. So just taking that into consideration there, we're thinking that this individual is going to be off work a long time. Obviously he's out of work. It's a huge impact of him and his family. And then if we think about the organisation, we can start thinking about the reputational damage as well. Another case study, this time a chemical company were in court after faulty ladder led to a 2-meter fall. So this time not a ladder slip, but a faulty ladder. Interestingly, what this leads us to is back to that provision and use of work equipment regulations. The court heard that an employee was using a ladder to inspect a steam leak when the ladder failed and the employee fell to the ground. The HSC tell us in this case that it's imperative that companies who use ladders in the workplace assign the role of inspections to a person or persons with the necessary training, skills, experience and knowledge. We will cover the inspections of ladders further on in the course. So 2 case studies there, one for a ladder falling away and one for a ladder actually failing. So the work at height regulations themselves, what actually is work at height? So work at height means a work in a place where if precautions were not taken, a person could fall a distance liable to cause personal injury. So it does not say that work at height is 2 meters or is 3 meters. As it clearly states there in yellow, a person could fall a distance liable to cause personal injury. So we would be working at height. If we work above ground level, above floor level. So if we're working above, we're working at height. Also, we're working at height if we could fall from an edge. If we fell through an opening or a fragile surface. Or if we could fall from ground level into an opening in a floor or a hole in the ground. If we're falling obviously into a pit, then we would be working at height if we're working on the edge of a pit. And that comes from the HSC. Could using a stairs, if we're walking up a stairs, could that be considered as working at height? Using a staircase for access in a permanent workplace is not working at height. However, what if you had to work while standing on the stairs, example to drill and fix handrails? So now if we're standing on the stairs and we're actually undertaking work, if there's a potential for us to fall, then we are working at height. Something to think about. We mentioned earlier on the step-by-step guide, and we looked online. We knew it was regulation 6, and it was avoid, it was prevent, it was minimize, and then last but not least, of course, we could use ladders. So avoid. Consider alternative methods if reasonably practicable. Example, assembling at ground level. So before we use a ladder, before we choose to use a ladder, we have to rule out that other methods cannot be used. After avoid, we have prevent. So by preventing, we can use collective preventative measures over individual protective measures. Example, edge protection, which will stop a lot of people falling off, rather than like an individual lanyard that we would put on ourselves. So collective over individual. And then minimize. We have to minimize the distance and or consequences of a fall using collective measures over individual measures. Example, safety nets rather than fall arrest lanyards. But after that minimize, this is where we get into the ladders. So ladders and step ladders. So as it says, for tasks of low risk and short duration, which is around 30 minutes, ladders and step ladders can be a sensible and practical option. If the risk assessment determines it is correct to use a ladder, you should further minimize the risk by making sure workers use the right ladder, so ladder selection. They are competent to use a ladder, they've been trained. They also follow any safe system of work that's put in place, and they are also aware of the risks and control measures. Well, if you had a written safe system of work and you got them to read it and sign it, then they would be aware of the risks and the control measures. What we need to know is a ladder is not our go-to piece of equipment. We have to avoid using ladders first if we can. Some examples. So using a hop-up, as it shows in the photograph, that is working at height. Standing above an excavation or pit, yes, working at height. We could injure ourselves if we fell through the gap. If we're working out with a scissors lift or a cherry picker, we're working at height. And of course, if we're using a ladder, we could fall a distance, which could end up in personal injury. So some of the requirements from the working at height regulations. All work must be risk assessed, must be properly planned and organised, and those involved in the work at height are trained and competent. So what I would say, if you don't have training, if your workforce have not undertaken training and it's not documented, it is really worth documenting it, but it's definitely you have to provide the training. You're obviously undertaking training doing this course. Any equipment, the work equipment, the ladder itself is appropriately inspected and maintained. We will talk more about inspection in the later module, but we must check that ladder before we use it and also at regular intervals and maintained. So ladders, if they're used outside and they're aluminium, you may end up being rusty, they may end up being damaged. So maintenance we need to look at as well. And we should have a formal regime. So any risks from fragile surfaces and the risk from falling objects is properly controlled also. And what about ladders themselves? Some fake news. It's fake news that the HSE have banned the use of ladders on construction sites. You've just seen the work at height regulations and you've seen Schedule 6. Clearly ladders can be used, but it's not the go-to equipment. That you need to be formally qualified to use a ladder. There is no requirement. That is fake news as well. You must be competent. Where does competent comes from? Skills, knowledge, ability, training, experience, all of these words. But if we were to suffer a fall, then the HSE quite rightly will ask us how we demonstrated that the workforce were competent. This training goes some way towards that competence, but it's not going to be taken, it should not be taken as competence in itself. It's also fake news that you need to have 2 feet and 1 hand on a step ladder at all times when carrying out a task. So it's fake that you need 2 feet and 1 hand on a step ladder. We can use our 2 feet, and as long as we're lower down on the steps, we can actually use the front part of our thighs. We should not do that for a long time, of course, but we can do that. It's not fake news. It is fake news. And now a look at Schedule 6. So you've seen Schedule 6 earlier on, but when we look at that, every employer should ensure that a ladder that is used for work if a risk assessment has been undertaken. Number 2, any surface upon the ladder at rest shall be stable and firm. 3, a ladder should also be positioned as to ensure its stability. So we looked at that incident earlier on where the ladder wasn't stable. A suspending ladder should be attached in a secure manner, and so that with the exception of a flexible ladder, it cannot be displaced and swinging is prevented. Portable ladders should be prevented from slipping. Number 6, a ladder used for access should be long enough to protrude sufficiently above the place of landing. Generally, that is 1 metre. 7, no interlocking or extension ladder shall be used unless its sections are prevented from moving relative to each other while they're in use. So that's for mobile ladder. Under 8, shall be prevented from moving before it is stepped on. Again, this is stability. And where a run of ladders rises a vertical distance of 9 metres or more above its base, there shall, where reasonably practicable, be provided at suitable intervals sufficient safe landing areas or rest platforms. That is, if the ladder rises a vertical distance of 9 metres. And 10, every ladder shall be used in such a way that a secure handhold and secure support are always available to the user, and the user can maintain a safe handhold while carrying a load unless, in the case of a step ladder, the maintenance of a handhold is not practicable when a load is carried. And a risk assessment under Regulation 3 of the Management Regulations has demonstrated that the use of a step ladder is justified because it's low risk and it's of short duration, which is around 30 minutes. That's Schedule 6. So Schedule 6 is very important for us. We will look a little bit further at the contents of that as we go along. Schedule 6, we must remember that. The law says that ladders can be used when a risk assessment has shown that a higher level of fall protection is not justified. The risk assessment is so important. The low risk, the work is of low risk and short duration of use. So this is 30 minutes again. Or there are existing workplace features which cannot be altered. So this guidance is from the HSE. The regulations set out the requirements for the safe use of ladders, including the surface, which we just looked at, the stability, which we've talked about, transferring from a ladder to a landing, which we've just looked at, secure handholds and supports, condition and inspection, which we've mentioned a number of times so far, and also, as it says there, additional guidance is also provided as INDG 455 and HSG 33, which we'll look at a little bit closer next. So a lot of the information in this training course comes from INDG 455, Safe Use of Ladders and Step Ladders. But I've also put there HSG 33, Health and Safety in Roof Work. This document has recently been updated, HSG 33. It's a long document, but it's a very informative document. It also has in there a really good section on risk and method statements, a lot of method statements, I should say. So there's two of the main documents for guidance provided by the HSE. So the key message from Module 2 is that the law does allow the use of ladders within limits and set requirements, which they must be met. And also that non-compliance is a breach of criminal law. And now we're going to have a look at the key points. You really should look at these because some of these will probably end up in the questions. So ladders fall under the work at height regulations, which is criminal law. It's in yellow, it's bold, it's criminal law. We can be prosecuted. Work at height is defined as work in a place where, if precautions weren't taken, a person could fall a distance liable to cause personal injury. There is no 2-metre rule. Work at height must be properly planned, organised and carried out by competent workers. Training. And all equipment must be checked and inspected. We also looked at the step-by-step guidance, which we know to be avoid work at height, prevent where it can't be avoided, and minimise. Minimise the distance and consequences of a fall. That's avoid, prevent, and minimise. And then after that, there was using ladders and step ladders. So ladders can be used for low risk, short duration work of approximately 30 minutes, or when features on a site cannot be altered. Some of the other requirements we looked at: the suitability of the ground, the stability, handholds, transferring from a ladder, condition and inspection. So that's the end of Module 2, the law, what we need to know. I hope you found that useful and look forward to the questions.